in person. Hey y'all, thanks for finding the Houston is Home podcast, where we celebrate the people and places that make Houston home. Every time you listen, we hope you learn something new about the greater Houston area, from inside the loop to the suburbs, maybe a cool spot you haven't visited, or hear an amazing story from someone who calls Houston home. We're glad you're here with us, and we hope you enjoy. Welcome, Steve. So glad you could join us. We're excited to learn more about you, more about your research on Houston over the last 40 years, your new book, and to hear why you love the city that we call home. So thank you so much for joining the Houston is Home podcast. Tell us a little about yourself. How are you doing today?
You've been great, Austin. Thanks. And thank you for what you're doing. I think this is a great chance to remind us of what a special place this is with all of its challenges and all of its significance. This is where, in many ways, as we'll touch on later, the American future is going to be worked out. We are there first. We're at the forefront of what's happening across all of America. Particularly interesting city. Important.
Yeah, it's just so amazing that we get to call this city home, and I'm so passionate about it.
That's right. And for most of us, we came here reluctantly. Yuck, the job is in Houston. We'll go for a couple of years, and then discovered these incredible amenities, this phenomenal restaurants, this wonderful arts and theater and ease of living in many ways that has. So it's been very interesting to watch that. And one of the things in our survey is just a quick. We asked people with identical questions over the years, how do you see the world? And we've been watching the world change. One of the things is people complain because we invite them to in our surveys about traffic, pollution, crime, the weather, the no mountains, the flying. And well, how would you rate the Houston area as a place to live? It's a wonderful place to live. Just overwhelmingly, people say. And I think that's the surprise, that you come to Houston thinking, yuck, why do I want to be in Houston? And then realize, we get a bum rap. This is a much more interesting and fun and beautiful city than most people recognize. People outside Houston still think of it as an oil and gas, business-oriented place with no redeeming virtues except come on down to make money. I used to say that you could dress a gorilla in a business suit in the 1970s, send him downtown to become a millionaire in a week. And Houston is world famous for having imposed the least amount of controls on development of any city in the Western world during the 70s. Who cares if it's ugly? So what if it smells? It's a smell of money. Now recognizing if we're going to make it in the 21st century, we have to become a destination of choice. You can see the city reinventing itself in a variety of very interesting, important ways.
Yeah, and it's so cool to see that, and that's what we hope to be able to do, is celebrate that process and celebrate the history from where we've come to where we're going. And like you said, like Houston, like your book title, The Prophetic City, Houston on the Cusp of a Changing America. Like you focus on the history. So where did we come from? What has that process been? How did we build up? What struggles did we face? And then also where you can see it going, and then how America, all the others, like that's how it's the start. That's where we see everything else. And what Houston's become.
Yeah, America's in phenomenal transformation. Nowhere more clearly seen or more sharply articulated than in Houston, Texas.
Yeah, for sure.
To see the people outside Houston increasingly coming to recognize this fourth largest city in the country and the most ethnically diverse city in America. Come on, that's New York. You can tell me it's Houston. So it's Houston is becoming better recognized now. My hope is that the book will help do that also, to say this may be in some ways the most interesting and consequential city in America.
Yeah, definitely. And I found your book a few months ago, and I know we got to talk a few months ago when I first found it and kind of dove through it. And it just kind of brings out that passion in my head, and that's really what kickstarted this project.
Oh, great!
Houston is Home podcast. So it's something that really being able to celebrate Houston and celebrate the people in it from all walks of life, and be able to connect them with people like yourself, people that have done studies on the city and seen where it's gone, and that call it home as well too. So I'm excited to get into our conversation today from your book. Hopefully hopefully once all the coronavirus and things, where you can start meeting in person. Hopefully I can come by and at least get it signed by you.
Oh, you bet.
Like that.
Well,
I'd love that. So.
I was looking forward to a whole bunch of book tours, and no one is meeting me anywhere. I'm just not a good time.
Yeah, definitely.
And then the other point to make, the book is already obsolete, right? Because all the experiences of the last year were sort of after the book was written. So that's going to be very interesting to go back into the survey next year and see how it changed by what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. So tell our listeners, give us a quick intro to yourself. So why you came to Houston, how long you've been in
Okay.
Houston, and kind of dive into your book a little bit and share with that. Is that okay?
You bet. Well, I grew up in somewhere, home was somewhere between Philadelphia and Boston. That
Okay.
corridor went. I was in Westchester County. Then I went to Haverford College near Philadelphia, and then Harvard, and then taught at Princeton, and that was my life. Got this great offer from this obscure place called Rice University in some town.
Harvard on the Bayou.
Yeah, Harvard of the Bayou. And Rice is, of course, an extraordinary university. We just and so I did exactly what everyone else did. I was finishing a book. My wife was finishing law school. We'll go for a couple of years and then find it. That was in the 70s, and we've been here ever since, right? And
Awesome.
the story of the surveys is that it fell to my lot to teach a research methods class to sociology majors at Rice in 1982. Houston was booming. 1 million people had moved into the city between 1980, 1970, 1982. 1 million, coming at the rate of 1,380 people a week. Booming city brought about by the tenfold increase in the value of oil. This was a one company town riding the resources of the industry and world famous for having imposed, as I mentioned, the least amount of controls on development.
Yep.
So we said, let's do a survey to measure how are people balancing this incredible growth with growing concerns about traffic, pollution, crime. What kind of city are we building? One-time survey, never occurred to me to do it again. 2 months later, in May of 1982, the oil industry collapsed. The price of oil had gone from $3.20 to $32.50 in 1982. We expected it to go to $50 oil and $75 oil. Suddenly fell down to $28 by the end of 1983.
Gosh.
100,000 jobs were lost in this booming city by the end of that year. We said, boy, we better do this survey again. And so now for 39 years, taking a representative random sample, Harris County residents reached by random telephone numbers, half now cell phone, half landline, asking people with identical questions over the years. How do you see the world? What's happening in your life? And we have watched the world change. Houston went into major recession. And by 1986, the worst regional recession of any part of the country at any time since World War II. 1 out of every 7 jobs that had been in Houston in 1982 had disappeared by 1986, 87. Worst regional recession of any part of the country at any time since World War II. And recovered into a restructured economy and a demographic revolution. Yeah. So let me fill that in very fast.
Yeah.
There were lots of good blue collar jobs in Houston in the 1960s and 70s. The big employers was Hughes Tool Company, Cameron Iron Works. You could drop out of high school with a strong right arm and be a rustabout on the oil fields or join a union and do this oil field production and be able to make a middle class wage. Those blue collar jobs have disappeared. Suddenly education has become critical to having access to the jobs of the 21st century. Growing inequalities in Houston, predicated above all else on access to quality education. Theme number 2, this was during the booming years of the oil boom, it was Anglos, as I mentioned, pouring into Houston from everywhere else in the country. By 1982, Houston had become the 4th largest city in America, having surpassed Philadelphia, an overwhelmingly Anglo city. After the oil bust of 1982, the Anglo population of Harris County stopped growing. And all the growth of this, the most rapidly growing city in America, has been the influx of African Americans, Latinos, and Asians. And this biracial southern city, dominated throughout all of its life by white men, has become the single most ethnically diverse major metropolitan area in the country. And so it's a truly remarkable. And then the census has given projections of what America will look like in 2050. And it's a picture of Houston today. So we are there first. How we navigate this transition will have enormous significance, not just for the Houston future, but for the American future. This is where the American future is being worked out. So it's, and then the other big change was no one cared about quality of life in the city. Who cares if it's ugly? So what if it smells? Now recognizing if Houston's going to make it, it has to become a destination of choice, a place where the best and the brightest people in America who can live anywhere will say, I want to live in Houston, Texas. You got the 3 great transformations of urban life in America, the new economy where education has become critical, the demographic transformation, and the critical importance of quality of life issues in building the prosperity of cities in the 21st century, all clearly, sharply articulated in this one remarkable city. So it's been fascinating to watch as a sociologist and wonderful to live in. It's that it's coming into its own, recognizing across the board that if we're going to make it, we need to reinvent this city. There's that famous saying: "There's nothing fails like success." Houston was so successful riding the oil boom for 80 years during the 20th century. Now having to rethink what does it need to do to position the city for prosperity in the 21st century. So.
Yeah, and I mean, that's definitely, I'm glad you brought up that point from failing from success and all those talking a little bit about that from going through that experience. I think that's allowed us to diversify and allowed us to be stronger moving forward and learning from those failures and not putting everything on one industry or anything. What now we have the medical industry, we have tech, we have all these different industries that are coming in.
Second largest port in the country. Yeah.
Yeah. And all, like, a lot of the people that I talk to in my real estate business and everything, they're coming here for low cost of living. They're coming in here for jobs and opportunity and kind of building up that business. So it's really exciting to see that and kind of going through that process and kind of what's happening. So I'm so grateful that we got to, at least you shared your 39 years of the survey and your study and everything that's kind of going on through the process, because people need to hear that. They need to know where they've come, where they've been, and what's going on through that process. So that's really exciting. So talk to me. I know you shared kind of your big themes in the book. Kind of what was your overall inspiration for the book? I know it was the study and kind of starting it, but when you really started diving into it and started working on the book, what was that process like for you? And kind of talk to a little bit about that.
Well, I was teaching this course annually at Rice, which carried out the survey, and it became more and more interesting, and realized that there's no other city in America that has been tracked in this way for that number of years. There's a national poll that's done every year called the Great General Social Survey, but no city has been tracked systematically with identical questions of representative randoms. And then I can tell people, don't blame me, I'm just asking the questions. Here, people are answering the questions differently today than they did 5 years ago and 10 years ago. We're watching the city evolve. And one of the striking things is the embrace of diversity that has come from people saying, wait a minute, who are these people? No one consulted with me before all these people came, stop it. To saying, wow, this is wonderful. This is who we are. And then to realize that we are at the forefront of where all of America is going to be. And the single most powerful predictor among Anglos of comfort with diversity and support for immigration is not education, it's not gender, it's age. Younger Anglos take for granted what we older Anglos are struggling to accept. Right? It's a beautiful. One of my favorite questions in the survey is asking Anglos, have you ever been involved in a romantic relationship with someone who was not Anglo? And of Anglos under 30, 58% said, thank you for asking. Yes, indeed, I have. And then it's in the 40s. And then when you reach people, Anglos age 70 and older, it's 18%. So it's a reminder that we older Anglos grew up in a different world than younger Anglos, right? And there's a law of human nature that says what I'm familiar with feels right and natural. What I'm unfamiliar with feels unnatural and somehow not quite right. So every measure shows this pattern. And I tell people, you gotta be gentle with us old Anglos. This is a big change. Younger Anglos are saying, this is what I love about America. This is why it's such a great place. And of course, falling in love with each other, marrying, making multiracial babies, in ways that are just fascinating to watch. In a traditionally Southern, biracial city with no impulse to be anything else, and then finding the world change, and then watching us coming to grips with those changes. Yeah. Same thing with the growing recognition across the board of the need to invest in education. One of the questions we've asked since the 90s was, which of these statements come closest to your feelings about the public schools in Houston? The schools have enough money, if it was used wisely, to provide a quality education, where the schools will need significantly more money to provide a quality education. If it was used wisely. We've always believed that. And in the 90s, overwhelming majority said that schools have all the money they need if it wasn't being wasted. And then during the first decade of the 21st century, it was a 50-50 split. We came back in 2018 and then came back again in 2020. And now suddenly 58% were saying the schools will need significantly more money to provide a quality education. That understanding, that awareness that we're in a different world now is really very interesting to watch gradually manifesting itself in the general public's understanding of these questions.
Yeah, for sure. And I think everything that we're going through right now in our world and everything, I think that accelerates kind of that process of needing money and needing resources and different things. Because there's a different type of learning going on now. There's whether schools are doing the hybrid or via Zoom or online. It's going to be interesting to see what your 2021 or 2020, like when those results come out, how are people responding? What are they going through? How their lives have changed, and what does that do? What does it do for Houston traffic? What does it do for all those different things? The education program, resources, like it's gonna change. And I think Houston, we've already gone through so much change, and we have so much diversity. I think we're going to be able to take that impact and handle it a little better than most cities. And that's my personal opinion.
Well, we'll see.
Houstonian, so I might be a little biased. I love Houston, and I love the people that call it home.
Yeah. Well, that's what's, it's going to be very interesting. We did our last interview for the 2020 survey on March 12th. And on March 16th, the pandemic hit. And restaurants were closed and bars. And we're going to go back in February of 2021, exactly the same way, random sample of Houstonians, asking people how you see the world and seeing how much has the world changed us in terms of our perception, this triple whammy, right, of a health pandemic that has accentuated the terrible inequalities, the deep vulnerabilities of African Americans and Latinos compared to Anglos, to the ravages of the pandemic, the shutdown of the economy. In the last survey, 68% said job opportunities are excellent or good in Houston. Not going to be quite so high when we go back. And the collapse of oil prices, which has big impact for Houston, of course. So, and then of course, this new sensitivity to racial injustice and the recognition of the structural inequality. What was striking in the protests of the Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd murder, basically, on the hands of the police, was that this was not just blacks protesting. This was everybody. This was America. This is not who we are. And that sense of all of us in this together is something new and powerful. And we'll have to see how that plays out as well as we come to, and then of course we have this election coming and what that all represents in the Supreme Court.
I guess we're just all squeezing it into 1 year so we can go get it moving. So
every year things become very interesting and fascinating city to watch.
Yeah, definitely. I know. So talking about your survey, how many questions are in that study, and what's kind of talk to me a little bit about that.
So it takes about 28 to 30 minutes to complete. So that's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And it used to be a whole lot easier to do this, right? Everyone had landline phones. The phone rings, you answer the damn phone. Now we got caller ID, we got machines. So it's a more expensive, longer process, more difficult, but it's doable. And people will answer. And once they start answering the questions, they almost never break it off. It becomes clear that this is a legitimate survey. There's a vague understanding. It's that Rice survey that's done every year now. This is the 40th year of doing this. Yeah. So it still works, but it's getting more and more difficult to do these kinds of surveys, to reach a random sample of people, because people just will not answer the telephones, right? And it comes up and says Rice University, and as soon as they get on the phone, we say, we just completely, how did you get my number? We have a computer that gives us random phone numbers. You don't know who you are or where you live, but your views are really important. This is our 40th survey, a chance to track how the city's been changing. Won't you help us? Yeah. And almost always people say, okay, what do you want to know? And then once it begins, we cover so many different areas that people are curious about. And then I can tell them the Chronicle will be carrying a big front page story of the findings in a couple of months. So it's working, and the city has just been fascinating. I mean, and I keep thinking, okay, I should do something else in my old age, and it's hard to decide to stop doing it. So.
Yeah, that's so cool, and just seeing how it is. So for someone like us, like our Houston is Home podcast, we want to celebrate the people of Houston and kind of really where it's an amazing place to live, the diversity and all those type of things. How can we gain exposure for the study? How can we broadcast it out there or let people be aware that, hey, if these people, if Dr. Klineberg or Steve calls you and says, hey, I want to talk to you about our city, you better answer the phone. Like we need to get that message out there. So is there ways that we can do that, or what can we do to support you?
Well, visit the kinder.rice.edu, of course, Kinder website, and a lot of YouTube sort of presentations of the fund. There's you can download the report on the 2020 survey. You can order the book.
Awesome.
But there are 4.6 million of us in Harris County. There's 6.8 million in the greater Houston metropolitan area.
Yeah.
So you're not going to reach everybody. But
Yeah,
and
for sure.
what is special about these surveys is that none of us get to talk to a representative random sample of Houstonians. We talk to the people we know, and we live in communities made up of what the Wall Street Journal once called PLUs, right? People like us.
Yeah.
So you don't get a sense of the city as a whole until you get these systematic sort. And we do, of course, interviews in Spanish as well as English. And in 3 of the years of our surveys, we reached 500 Asians, with 24% of the interviews done in Vietnamese, Cantonese, Mandarin, and Korean. So we get
That's awesome.
pretty good picture of who we are, what we're becoming, where we're heading. And then, of course, to ask who's changing and who isn't, and what's leading the move, and where's the resistance to these things. And really interesting to watch people, just ordinary folks, coming to grips with Houston's a different place today than it was 5 years or 10 years ago. And also, I hope and think, beginning to recognize that it's not automatic anymore. Houston's success depends on us, depends on collective investments. And I end the book saying the jury is out, because it isn't clear yet that Houston or America is going to be making the kind of investments that we need to build a sustainable society of true, we'll never get totally equal opportunity, much more equal opportunity across the board, especially in Houston, where it is the Anglos who are aging the most, and it's the young people who are disproportionately non-Anglo. That's our future, and so 70% of everybody in Harris County under the age of 20, 70% are African American and Latino. 21% are Anglos. It's not till you reach people age 63 and older in Harris County that the majority of folks are still Anglos. And at each younger age group, the percent of Anglos. So that's our future. And we're not making those investments yet. And so my hope is that the surveys can help clarify the responsibilities that all of us have, all of us who love this city, who believe in America, to say we've got to make sure that we're positioning the city and state and country for success in the 21st century.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And kind of going back to your question, is it difficult to ask the same questions every year, and do you want to ask new ones, or is it kind of you're set in the study and you want to know exactly how it's changing, and asking those same questions helps that process?
Well, the difficulty is that there's so many other questions you want to ask, and we already, as I mentioned, it's like 30 minutes practically to do the survey. Can't do longer than that. Yeah. So we're going to, we have capabilities at the Kinder Institute. We just hired another first-class researcher to work with us. So we may end up, we do this survey in the spring of every year. And our thought is maybe have an opportunity to do a more focused survey in the fall that can pick up on some of the themes that we're really, when you ask a question, the exact wording matters. If you ask people about abortion rights, it's different from ending a pregnancy. Than the word abortion. Examples of that sort. So you got the identical question. And so we're stuck with questions we asked 15 years ago. They're not necessarily the perfect questions, but they're there. We're going to ask it exactly the same way. To ask, are people answering the question identically? And there's a random error of plus or minus 3%. So a difference of 6 percentage points in people's answers from last time we asked the question could be random fluctuation. A change of 7 or 8 points tells you people are answering the question differently. So the great strength of this has been that people are answering the questions differently. That we're really watching a city in evolution in a way that is unfairly credited, as you were talking about earlier, with having planned to do this. It was a one-time survey. Never occurred to me to study Houston that much more. I had to teach this research methods class, and then suddenly having this incredible opportunity to watch this, the fourth largest city, most understudied major city in America. There's been no research done. We're understudied in Houston because we're under-universitied. There are more studies done on New Haven every year than of Houston because of Yale, right? So this became a really interesting process that has grown more and more interesting every year. and more people understanding, interested in it, waiting for the data to come out. It's been a lot. So we're all in this together. It's,
Awesome.
And here's how we're changing, and here's how we're not changing. This has been very interesting.
Sure.
But we're stuck now. We can't. If you want to ask new questions, we've got to start a new survey.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we've got a few minutes left on our time with you, so I'd love to dive in a little personally. So, like, what do you love about Houston? Like, what do you like to do on the weekends? What's your favorite stuff since you've lived here and kind of a little bit?
I'm an academic. I write. I'm not. When have you ever read enough? When you know? But no, I do. The city's some of its things, wonderful restaurants. This ethnic diversity that no one can deny has made this so much richer and more interesting place than when we first came. This was, you had a choice of steak or tacos. They did it. Nothing else. And then wonderful museums and watching I'm getting more and more enthralled with the arts and culture. Houston's one of the greatest art centers of the world, sitting right here. Great museums and world-class ballets, symphony, opera, repertory theater. So it's unlimited amount of opportunities, and you can get to those places. When I was taught at Princeton, you go into New York, it's almost impossible to get a ticket for anything. Here you can, right? So I think that's what struck us the most when we first came, is that this was an extraordinarily interesting city, accessible. You could get to things, you could do things, and so this has just continued to be, and again, some surprise. I mean, I think I share what most Houston. Who knew that this was going to be such an interesting place to live, and there's so much variety, and who knew that it would turn out to be maybe the most significant city in America? Because with no one having planned this, we are where all of America is going to be. We're there first. We're at the center and at the forefront of what's going to happen across the country. So it makes this city maybe the most interesting city in the country.
Yeah, that's so cool, and thank you so much for sharing that. We're so grateful for your time here today, for sharing your study, for sharing your book, for sharing your personal experience. It's really truly a privilege for me as a native Houston. I mean, my family lives and dies in Houston. Like I even have family that dates back to the 1840s that came over from Croatia and like had properties on White Oak Bayou, and that's what this process I've researched and dove into that. So it's really cool to see. And just how it's changed, and how from my life, I was born in 1990, so like right after, kind of right when the uptick. So like I've known Houston as a growing, as expanding, and those type of things. So it's interesting to see where it's going to go from here, how people are changing, what people's reactions are, and how we can all come together and serve our community. That's the biggest thing that we want this to be. Yes. We want to be able to build community, serve the community, and help people find their community. And we feel like Houston has so many different communities and so many different people that all coming together and just working together and
you can play a great role in helping people understand, because none of us see the city whole. We see only little pieces. Yeah. But also, you're a beautiful example of how this is a very different city than it was when your parents and grandparents were here. For sure. And you've embraced it, and you've come to recognize how much richer and interesting it is to be in Houston today. In a way that we're watching in our surveys as well. So it bodes well for the city, but it also requires of us some real action. As I say, in the old days, you could dress a gorilla in a business suit, send them down, not make money. You buy a house and it doubles in value. Yep. We're in a world where this is, our success will depend on us more than it probably ever has before, on our collective willingness to make these investments and to ensure quality education from birth to college, from cradle to career, across the board, in a way that will determine the Houston future.
For sure. Well, thank you again for your time. How can people look into your research, follow you, connect with you? What are ways that they can kind of contribute to what's going on and what you're working on here?
So I guess the two best bets. One is kinder.rice.edu. That gets you into the Kinder. Okay. And you can download all the 20 reports that we've written in each of the last 20 years. You can go to YouTube and just put in Klineberg, Klineberg, and out will pop a whole bunch of different talks of areas that I've given. And buy the book in Brazos Bookstore. It's a good place to do it. And I tell people is that the book is a story of Houston told by the people of Houston. Not only by the 47,000 representative, randomly selected people that we've interviewed over these years, but also about 70 major interviews we've conducted with key people and sort of key actors and immigrants and people working on immigration issues. And their voices are there too. And it's an effort to say this is what is Houston is the people of Houston. And
That's awesome.
So I feel good about that. The book covers that well. But as I say, it's already obsolete as we look at what's happening. So it's a difference between the long-term trends that the book is clear about, in fact, and the short-term adjustments that all of us need to make given this pandemic and the tremendous dislodging of our lives that this has represented. So it'll be interesting again to pick that up as we look at the survey next year. So, thank you, Austin.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us today and tuning into our conversation with Dr. Klineberg. It was an amazing conversation and learned so much about Houston. Don't forget to follow us on our Facebook page, Houston is Home. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel and listen to us on all major podcast platforms. If you know a person or a place we should spotlight on Houston is Home, we'd love to hear from you. Comment below if there's somebody that you think we should talk to or a place that we should go out and spotlight and showcase on an upcoming episode.